In the vast expanse of the Andromeda Galaxy, where ancient bloodlines ruled star systems and genetic perfection determined one's place in the cosmic hierarchy, humanity was considered nothing more than a curious anomaly. The Draconian Empire, with its millennia-old traditions and bio-engineered nobility, had catalogued every species in their sector of space. They knew which races possessed telepathic abilities, which could manipulate gravity with thought alone, and which were blessed with lifespans that stretched across eons. But they had never encountered a species quite like humans. Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenobiologist from the human colony ship Perseverance, was about to discover that sometimes the most extraordinary power lies not in advanced technology or genetic manipulation, but in something as simple and profound as touch. In a galaxy where the ruling class had forgotten the warmth of genuine contact, where the most powerful beings existed in sterile isolation, Sarah's humanity would prove to be the key to awakening something that had been dormant for centuries. The Dragon Lady of the Vorthak dynasty was about to learn that evolution had played a cosmic joke on the universe, giving the seemingly weakest species the one ability that could challenge the foundation of galactic power itself. The first time Dr. Sarah Chen saw the Dragon Lady, she was floating in a crystalline suspension chamber deep within the Vorthak Palace, her scaled skin shimmering like liquid mercury under the artificial lights. Sarah pressed her face against the observation window, her breath fogging the reinforced glass as she studied the magnificent creature before her. Lady Zephyra Vorthak, heir to the dragon throne of the Andromeda sector, had been in this catatonic state for over 300 years. Her condition baffled the greatest medical minds in the galaxy. The Draconian Empire's most advanced bioengineers, telepathic healers from the Ethereal Consortium, and even the mysterious quantum monks from the Edge Worlds had all attempted to revive her. Each had failed spectacularly. Sarah had arrived on Vorthak Prime as part of a human diplomatic mission, ostensibly to negotiate mining rights for rare earth elements. The truth was more complex. Humanity had been making waves across the galaxy with their peculiar ability to solve problems that had stumped civilizations for millennia. They fixed broken AI systems through intuition rather than code, healed diseases by understanding patterns that escaped others, and somehow managed to communicate with species that had been considered impossible to reach. The Draconian Empire, proud and ancient, had reluctantly agreed to let the humans examine their greatest failure. It was a matter of pride now. If these upstart mammals could succeed where the Empire's best had failed, it would reshape the balance of power across 3 star systems. Emperor Valdris Vorthak himself had escorted Sarah through the palace corridors. His massive frame towered over her diminutive human form, his golden scales catching the light from the floating orbs that illuminated their path. Despite his intimidating presence, Sarah noticed something vulnerable in his ancient eyes when he spoke of his daughter. She was brilliant, he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. The most gifted of my bloodline in 1,000 generations. She could manipulate matter at the molecular level, bend space-time with her thoughts, and commune with the quantum field itself. Then one day, she simply stopped. They had paused outside the medical chamber, and Sarah could see the weight of centuries pressing down on the Emperor's shoulders. Her body functions perfectly. Her brain shows activity, but she exists in some state between consciousness and oblivion that we cannot comprehend, let alone cure. The medical team assigned to Sarah consisted of Dr. Simonite, Kithara, the Empire's chief bioengineer, and Mindweaver Ixion, a telepathic specialist whose crystalline head pulsed with soft blue light. Both regarded the human with barely concealed skepticism. Sarah was used to this reaction. Humans were still considered primitive by most galactic standards, despite their growing reputation for solving impossible problems. The lady's neural patterns are unlike anything we have documented, Dr. Kithara explained, as they entered the medical facility. Her forearms moved gracefully as she manipulated the holographic displays showing Zephyra's vital signs. She exists in a state of suspended animation that appears to be voluntary, yet she shows no signs of consciousness. Mindweaver Ixion's thoughts brushed against Sarah's mind like silk. The human had learned to tolerate telepathic contact during her years in space, though it still felt invasive. I have attempted to reach her consciousness thousands of times. There is something there, deep within her mind, but it recoils from any contact. It is as if she has built walls around her very soul. Sarah studied the readings, noting patterns that seemed familiar yet strange. Human medicine was still considered rudimentary by galactic standards, but Sarah had noticed that their approach often differed fundamentally from other species. Where others sought technological solutions, humans tended to look for emotional or psychological causes. "Has anyone considered that she might not want to wake up?" Sarah asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Kithara's scales flared slightly, a sign of irritation among Draconians. The lady has everything to live for. She is heir to an empire that spans 17 star systems. Her genetic code is perfection itself. Why would she choose such an existence? But Mindweaver Ixion's crystalline head pulsed more rapidly, indicating deep thought. The human raises an interesting point. In my telepathic contact, I sensed not emptiness, but a profound sense of isolation, as if she had withdrawn so far into herself that she could no longer find the way back. Sarah requested time alone with the patient, a request that initially met with firm resistance. The idea of leaving a human unattended with the Empire's most precious individual was almost unthinkable. It was only the Emperor's direct intervention that made it possible, and even then, Sarah was monitored by a dozen security systems. Standing alone beside Zephyra's suspension chamber, Sarah began to understand the magnitude of the tragedy before her. The Dragon Lady was physically perfect in every way that mattered to Draconian society. Her scales held an opalescent quality that indicated the highest genetic purity. Her bone structure was elegant and powerful, marking her as a warrior queen of the highest order. Even in her suspended state, she radiated an aura of barely contained power. But there was something else, something that the advanced medical scanners had missed. Sarah's human intuition, shaped by millions of years of social evolution, detected subtle signs of profound loneliness. The way Zephyra's body was positioned, even unconscious, suggested someone who had pulled into herself for protection. Her hands were clenched, not in anger, but in the defensive posture of someone who had learned that the world was not safe. Sarah began reviewing the historical records of Zephyra's life, searching for clues that others might have missed. What she found painted a picture of an individual who had been isolated by her very perfection. As the most genetically advanced Draconian in generations, Zephyra had been treated more like a precious artifact than a living being. Her education had been conducted through neural downloads rather than personal interaction. Her physical training had been supervised by AI systems rather than living instructors. Even her social interactions had been carefully managed and monitored. The more Sarah read, the clearer the picture became. Zephyra had never experienced genuine, unguarded contact with another living being. Every relationship in her life had been filtered through the expectations of her royal status, her genetic perfection, or her role as heir to the Empire. She had been surrounded by people her entire life, yet she had always been fundamentally alone. This isolation had been compounded by her incredible abilities. As her powers had grown, so had the reverence and fear with which others treated her. People bowed in her presence not just out of respect, but out of genuine terror of her capabilities. She could end lives with a thought, reshape matter with her will, and bend the fabric of space to her desires. But no one had ever simply held her hand. Sarah's research revealed that the catalyst for Zephyra's condition had been the death of her younger brother, Prince Valen. He had been the only individual in her life who had treated her as a person rather than as a force of nature. When he died in a starfighter accident, Zephyra had retreated so far into herself that she had effectively chosen to exist outside of reality entirely. The human doctor spent days studying every aspect of Zephyra's case, but she kept returning to one fundamental observation. All the medical interventions had been technological in nature. Drugs, neural stimulation, quantum field manipulation, even attempts to directly interface with her consciousness. No one had tried the most basic form of connection that existed between living beings. Physical touch. In Draconian society, physical contact was highly ritualized and rarely spontaneous. The royal family, in particular, existed in a state of physical isolation that would have driven most humans insane. Sarah realized that Zephyra might have literally never experienced the simple comfort of genuine physical contact with another being. When Sarah proposed her theory to the medical team, the reaction was swift and negative. Dr. Kithara pointed out that Zephyra's biodefenses would likely kill anyone who made contact with her. Mindweaver Ixion added that the lady's unconscious psychic abilities could drive an unprepared mind into madness. The security chief, a massive Draconian named General Korath, flatly stated that no alien would be permitted to physically touch a member of the royal family. But Emperor Vuldris surprised them all. After listening to Sarah's presentation, he remained silent for several minutes, his ancient eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the chamber walls. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of grief. In all our attempts to save her, we have treated her as we always have, as something precious to be protected, rather than someone who needs connection. The human's proposal is dangerous, perhaps even foolish, but we have exhausted every other option. General Korath stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the light. Your Majesty, the risk is too great. If the human is injured or killed in the attempt, it could trigger a diplomatic incident. If she somehow harms the lady, then we will be no worse off than we are now, the Emperor replied simply. My daughter has been lost to us for 3 centuries. If there is even the smallest chance of bringing her back, we must take it. The preparations took 2 days. Sarah underwent extensive biocompatibility tests to ensure that her human physiology wouldn't trigger Zephyra's defensive systems. Mindweaver Ixion taught her basic mental shielding techniques to protect against psychic feedback. Dr. Kithara developed neutralizing agents that could be administered instantly if Sarah showed signs of biorejection. Despite all these precautions, everyone understood that the attempt would likely result in Sarah's death. Zephyr's defensive systems had been designed to protect her from threats that could level cities. A simple human touch might trigger responses that could vaporize Sarah instantly. But Sarah had volunteered for this mission knowing the risks. Throughout her career as a xenobiologist, she had seen the effects of isolation on countless species. She had watched brilliant minds withdraw from reality when they lost hope of genuine connection. If her theory was correct, Zephyra wasn't just sleeping. She was protecting herself from a world that had never offered her the simple comfort of being truly known by another being. The night before the attempt, Sarah stood again before Zephyra's suspension chamber. The dragon lady floated in the crystalline fluid, her body perfectly preserved, her face serene but somehow deeply sad. Sarah placed her hand against the glass, knowing that tomorrow she would either save this magnificent creature or die in the attempt. I know what it's like to feel alone, Sarah whispered to the sleeping figure. Even when you're surrounded by people, sometimes you feel like you're the only real person in the universe. But you're not alone anymore. Tomorrow, you'll know what it feels like to be touched by someone who sees you as a person, not as a weapon or a treasure or a responsibility. The medical chamber was filled with tension the next morning. Emperor Valdris stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. Doctor. Kithara monitored the bioscanners while General Korath positioned himself to intervene if anything went wrong. Mindweaver Ixion had his consciousness partially extended, ready to attempt to shield Sarah if Zephyra's psychic defenses activated. The suspension chamber was slowly drained and opened. For the first time in 3 centuries, Zephyra's body was exposed to open air. Her chest rose and fell with slow, steady breathing, and her scales seemed to shimmer with inner light. She was even more magnificent up close, a being of such perfect beauty and power that Sarah could understand why others found her intimidating. Sarah approached slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee from this creature who could unmake her with a stray thought. But her human compassion was stronger than her fear. This wasn't a monster or a goddess. This was a woman who had been alone for so long that she had forgotten how to exist in the world. Zephyra, Sarah said softly, her voice the only sound in the chamber. My name is Sarah. I'm here to help you remember that you're not alone. She reached out slowly, her small human hand approaching Zephyr's scaled arm. The moment stretched endlessly, filled with the weight of centuries of isolation and the desperate hope that connection might still be possible. Sarah's fingers made contact with Zephyra's skin. The moment Sarah's fingers touched Zephyra's scaled skin, reality exploded around them. The contact sent shockwaves through dimensions that the draconian medical equipment couldn't even detect. Sarah felt herself pulled into a void so profound that it made the emptiness of space seem crowded by comparison. She was falling through layers of consciousness, each one more isolated than the last, until she found herself standing in what could only be described as a prison made of crystallized loneliness. Zephyra's inner landscape was a maze of crystal walls that stretched endlessly in every direction, each surface reflecting not images, but emotions. Sarah could see her own face multiplied infinitely, but more importantly, she could feel the overwhelming despair that had shaped this mental fortress. Every wall represented another moment, when Zephyra had been treated as an object rather than a person, another interaction where her immense power had created distance instead of connection. In the center of this crystalline labyrinth, Sarah found her. Zephyra sat curled in on herself, her magnificent scales dulled to gray, her eyes closed against a universe that had never offered her genuine warmth. She looked smaller here, younger, like a child who had built walls so high that she had forgotten there was a world beyond them. You shouldn't be here, Zephyra's voice echoed through the crystal maze, though her lips didn't move. This place will consume you. It consumes everything eventually. But Sarah stepped closer, and for the first time in centuries, Zephyra's eyes opened. They were the color of distant nebulae, swirling with power and pain in equal measure. I felt that kind of isolation, Sarah said gently. Not to your degree, but I understand what it's like to feel like you're separated from everyone around you by invisible barriers. Zephyra laughed, but the sound was like breaking glass. You're human. Your species thrives on connection. You can't possibly understand what it's like to have your every interaction filtered through fear and reverence. Do you know what it's like to have people throw themselves at your feet, not out of love, but out of terror? To know that every word spoken to you is carefully calculated to avoid triggering your displeasure? Sarah sat down beside Zephyra in the crystalline space, noting how the dragon lady flinched at her proximity.
You're right. I can't understand exactly what you've experienced.
But I can see what it's done to you. You've been alone for so long that you've forgotten how to be with someone else. Around them, the crystal walls began to shift and change, showing scenes from Zephyra's life. Sarah watched a young dragon lady excel in every test, master every skill, surpass every expectation, while the adults around her spoke in hushed tones about her incredible abilities. She saw teenage Zephyra accidentally destroying a training room in a moment of emotional outburst, then watching in horror as the instructors cowered in fear. She witnessed the royal court treating her like a living weapon, to be carefully maintained rather than a person to be loved. My brother Valen was different, Zephyra whispered, and the crystal walls showed a younger draconian with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He was the only one who ever laughed at my jokes instead of analyzing them for hidden meanings. The only one who ever disagreed with me without worrying that I might vaporize him for his impertinence. Sarah watched the scenes play out, seeing how Prince Valen had been Zephyra's anchor to reality. He treated her like a sister instead of a deity, challenged her ideas, shared his problems with her, and most importantly, was never afraid of her. When he died in that starfighter accident, Zephyra had lost the only person who had ever truly seen her as real. After he died, I realized that I had never actually connected with anyone else, Zephyra continued. Everyone else was just playing a role around me. The devoted subjects, the wise advisors, the protective guards. But Valen was real with me, and when he was gone, I understood that I was completely alone. So I came here, to this place inside my mind where at least the isolation is honest. Sarah reached out slowly, telegraphed her movement so that Zephyra could pull away if she wanted, but the dragon lady didn't retreat. Sarah's human hand covered Zephyra's scaled fingers, and for the first time in centuries, Zephyra felt the simple comfort of genuine touch given without expectation or agenda. The effect was immediate and profound. The crystal walls around them began to crack, not shattering but developing hairline fractures that let in light from the outside world. Zephyra gasped as she felt Sarah's emotional presence, warm and real and completely unafraid of her power. How? Zephyra whispered, staring at their joined hands. How are you not terrified of what I could do to you? Sarah smiled, and the warmth of that expression sent more cracks racing through the crystalline prison. 'Cause I'm not here to use your power or control it or hide from it. I'm here because you're a person, and people aren't meant to be alone. Your abilities are part of you, but they're not all of you. I can feel your curiosity about the universe, your love for your family despite everything, your desire to be useful and valued for more than just your strength. In the physical world, the medical monitors were going wild. Zephyra's body was showing unprecedented activity, her neural patterns shifting and changing in ways that had the draconian medical team scrambling to understand what was happening. Sarah's vital signs were equally erratic, but Mindweaver Ixion's telepathic monitoring revealed that she was somehow maintaining consciousness despite being pulled into Zephyra's mental space. Emperor Valdris stood frozen, watching his daughter's body begin to move for the first time in centuries. Her fingers twitched, her breathing deepened, and color began to return to her scales. But most remarkably, her expression was changing from the serene emptiness that had marked her features for so long to something that looked almost like hope. Back in the crystal maze, Sarah and Zephyra sat together as the walls continued to crack and crumble around them. Zephyra was experiencing something she had never known before, being truly seen and accepted by another consciousness. Sarah wasn't trying to fix her or use her or manage her. She was simply present, offering the gift of genuine companionship. I'm scared, Zephyra admitted, and admitting fear was perhaps the most human thing she had ever done. I've been hiding in here for so long. What if I go back and nothing has changed? What if everyone still treats me like a dangerous artifact to be carefully handled? Sarah squeezed her hand gently. Then we'll deal with it together. You don't have to face the world alone anymore. Humans are very good at building connections, at creating families out of choice rather than blood. You'll always have people who see you as you really are. The crystal walls were dissolving now, replaced by glimpses of the real world. Zafira could see her father's worried face, could feel the genuine love and concern radiating from him, despite all the formal protocol that usually governed their interactions. She could sense Dr. Cathara's scientific excitement at the unprecedented neural activity, but also the physician's real desire to see her patient healed. Even General Korath, despite his military stoicism, was hoping desperately for her recovery. They do care, Zafira realized with wonder. All this time, I thought they only valued me for what I could do for the Empire, but they actually care about me as a person. People show love in different ways, Sarah explained. Your father's love looks like protection and careful protocols because he's terrified of losing you. Doctor. Cathara's love looks like obsessive medical monitoring because she wants to keep you healthy. They may not express it the way you need them to, but the caring is real. As the last of the crystal walls crumbled away, Zafira found herself looking at Sarah with genuine curiosity rather than defensive isolation. What's it like, living among people who aren't afraid of you? Sarah laughed, and the sound was like music in the dissolving mental space. Humans are afraid of lots of things, but we're also incredibly adaptable. We get used to being around powerful people pretty quickly. My grandmother used to say that everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time no matter how important they think they are. The absurdity of the image of the dragon lady putting on pants made Zafira laugh for the first time in centuries, and the sound of her genuine laughter sent the last fragments of the crystal prison spinning away into nothingness. They were standing now in a space that looked like a garden, with flowers that had never existed in the physical universe but somehow perfectly represented the feeling of new growth and possibilities. I want to go back, Zafira said suddenly. I want to try again. But I need you to help me remember how to be around people without the walls. Sarah nodded. The transition might be difficult. You've been isolated for so long that normal social interaction will feel overwhelming at first. But humans have experience helping people reconnect with the world. We've been doing it for thousands of years. They began to move toward a light that represented the waking world, but Zafira hesitated at the threshold. Sarah, what you've done for me, what you've shown me about connection and acceptance, it's going to change everything. Not just for me, but for the entire empire. If the royal family can learn to form genuine relationships instead of just formal alliances, if our people can see that even the most powerful among us need authentic connection, Sarah smiled. Revolutions often start with simple human kindness. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is treat someone as a person, instead of as their role or position. As they stepped together through the threshold between Zafira's inner world and physical reality, both women knew that they were not just ending 3 centuries of isolation. They were beginning a transformation that would ripple through the entire Draconian Empire, showing a civilization built on power and genetic perfection that their greatest strength might lie not in their advanced abilities, but in their capacity for genuine connection. In the medical chamber, Zafira's eyes opened for the first time in 300 years. The first thing she saw was her father's face, not the formal mask of the emperor, but the worried expression of a parent who had nearly lost his child. The first thing she felt was Sarah's warm hand still holding hers, anchoring her to the reality of human connection. And the first words she spoke were not the formal phrases expected of royalty, but something much more profound. I'm ready to learn how to be real. The Dragon Lady had awakened, and with her, the possibility that an entire empire might discover what it truly meant to be alive. The first few hours after Zafira's awakening were chaotic beyond anything the Draconian medical team had prepared for. 3 centuries of suspended animation had left her body functional but hypersensitive to every stimulus. The soft humming of the life support systems sounded like roaring engines to her enhanced hearing. The gentle illumination of the medical chamber blazed like miniature suns to her adjusted vision. Every texture, every scent, every vibration threatened to overwhelm senses that had been dormant for so long. But the most overwhelming sensation was the presence of other minds around her. Zafira's psychic abilities, dormant during her isolation, came flooding back with unprecedented intensity. She could feel everyone's emotions pressing against her consciousness like a tide of raw sensation. Dr. Cathara's scientific excitement mixed with medical concern, General Korath's relief battling with protective instincts. Mindweaver Ixion's crystalline thoughts resonating with harmonic frequencies. And underneath it all, her father's profound love, wrapped in centuries of carefully controlled imperial dignity. "Too much," Zephyra gasped, her newly awakened voice barely a whisper. "I can feel everything. Everyone. It's like being inside a storm of emotions." Sarah immediately understood the problem. During her research on draconian physiology, she had learned that their psychic abilities were usually developed gradually from childhood, with careful training to build mental defenses and filters. Zephyra was experiencing the emotional equivalent of staring directly into the sun after centuries in darkness. "Look at me," Sarah said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos of sensations. "Focus on just my mind, just my emotions. Use them as an anchor." Sarah deliberately projected feelings of calm and safety, drawing on techniques she had learned from human meditation practices. But more than that, she offered something the draconian healing traditions had never considered: unconditional acceptance. She wasn't trying to fix Zephyra or manage her abilities. She was simply being present, offering her mind as a stable point in the storm of overwhelming sensation. Zephyra's breathing began to slow as she focused on Sarah's emotional presence. The human's mind was refreshingly straightforward, free of the complex layers of protocol and hidden agenda that characterize most draconian interactions. Sarah was genuinely concerned for Zephyra's well-being, genuinely happy to see her awake, and genuinely unafraid of her power. "Better?" Sarah asked gently. Zephyra nodded, though she kept her eyes fixed on Sarah's face. "You're like a calm harbor in a hurricane. How do you maintain such emotional clarity?" "Practice," Sarah replied with a small smile. "Humans spend a lot of time learning to manage our emotions because we're naturally empathetic. We had to develop techniques for staying centered when we were surrounded by other people's feelings." Emperor Voldras stepped forward slowly, his massive frame carefully controlled to avoid any sudden movements that might startle his daughter. "Zephyra," he said, and his voice carried none of the formal authority of his imperial role. It was simply a father speaking to his child. "How do you feel?" For a moment, Zephyra stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. Through her enhanced psychic perception, she could feel the depth of his love for her, a love that had been hidden for centuries beneath layers of duty and protocol. "Father," she whispered, and the word carried 300 years of unexpressed longing. "I can feel how much you've missed me. How much you've blamed yourself for my condition." Valdras's composure cracked, and for the first time in centuries, the Emperor of the Draconian Empire allowed tears to flow down his scaled cheeks. "I failed you, my daughter. I gave you everything except what you needed most." "You gave me what you thought was best," Zephyra replied, and, with Sarah's support, she slowly sat up in the medical chamber. "But neither of us understood then what I understand now. Power without connection is just elaborate imprisonment." Over the following days, Sarah worked with Zephyra to develop new coping strategies for her enhanced abilities. The traditional draconian approach had been to suppress or rigidly control psychic talents, but Sarah introduced concepts from human psychology about integration and balance. Instead of fighting against her empathic abilities, Zephyra learned to use them as tools for deeper understanding and communication. The transformation was remarkable. Within a week, Zephyra was not only functioning normally, but demonstrating levels of emotional intelligence and interpersonal skill that astounded the palace staff. She began having genuine conversations with people who had served her family for decades, but had never dared to speak to her as anything other than a formal superior. General Korath was perhaps the most surprised by this change. He had spent centuries maintaining rigid military protocol around the royal family, but Zephyra's new approach to relationships made such formality feel unnecessary and even counterproductive. "General," Zephyr said one morning as he delivered the daily security briefing, "I can sense that you have concerns about the mining negotiations with the human colonies, not the official concerns in your report, but personal worries about how this relationship might affect our people." Korath's military training warred with his surprise at being directly asked about his feelings. "Your Highness, my personal opinions are not relevant to, they are to me," Zephyra interrupted gently. "You've protected my family for 2 centuries. Your insights matter more than any formal analysis. What do you really think about working with the humans?" For the first time in his military career, General Korath found himself having an actual conversation with a member of the royal family. He spoke about his concerns that human unpredictability might destabilize draconian society, but also about his grudging respect for their problem-solving abilities. Zephyra listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and actually incorporated his perspective into her policy recommendations. The ripple effects of this approach spread throughout the palace and beyond. Staff members who had operated on rigid hierarchical principles for centuries began to discover that they had thoughts and opinions that were valued by their superiors. Communication flowed more freely, problems were identified and solved more quickly, and the entire administrative structure became more efficient and responsive. But the most significant changes were occurring in the relationship between Zephyra and her father. Emperor Valdris had ruled through strength and tradition for millennia, but his daughter's new emotional intelligence was showing him possibilities he had never considered. "I've been thinking about Valen," Zephyra said one evening, as she and her father shared a private meal for the first time in 4 centuries. It was a simple dinner, prepared by palace staff but served without ceremony. Eaten in a small room rather than the grand imperial dining hall. Valdris set down his eating utensil, his expression becoming carefully controlled. "Your brother's death was a tragedy that we have all learned to accept." "No, father, we haven't," Zephyra said gently. "We've learned to avoid talking about it. But that's not the same thing. Valen's death broke something in our family, and we never dealt with that break. We just built walls around it and pretended everything was normal." Through her psychic abilities, Zephyra could feel her father's pain like a physical presence in the room. Valdris had loved his son deeply, but draconian culture had no framework for processing grief in a healthy way. The death had been treated as a military casualty to be honored but not mourned, and the emotional wound had festered for centuries. "Sarah taught me that humans have something called grief counseling," Zephyra continued. "They understand that losing someone you love requires active emotional work, not just acceptance. They help each other process loss in ways that allow healing rather than just survival." Valdris looked at his daughter with wonder. "In 300 years of searching for a cure for your condition, it never occurred to me that the solution would come from understanding emotions rather than suppressing them. The humans approach feelings differently than we do," Zephyra explained. "They see emotions as information to be understood rather than forces to be controlled. When I was trapped in my own mind, I wasn't being logical or disciplined. I was running away from feelings I didn't know how to process." Their conversation continued deep into the night, covering topics that Imperial protocol had never allowed. Valdris spoke about the loneliness of leadership, about his fears of making decisions that would affect billions of lives, about his regret over the emotional distance that his role had created between him and his children. Zephyra shared her discoveries about the connection between vulnerability and strength, about how admitting uncertainty could lead to better decisions rather than weaker ones. As word of these changes spread beyond the palace, the effects began to transform draconian society as a whole. The rigid caste system that had defined their civilization for millennia began to show cracks as people in different social positions started having genuine conversations across traditional barriers. Scientists began collaborating with artists, military leaders sought input from civilians, and even the lowest service workers found that their perspectives were being valued by their superiors. The transformation was not without resistance. Many draconians found the new emphasis on emotional openness disturbing and potentially dangerous. A faction of traditional nobles, led by Duke Zerion of the Outer Territories, argued that these human influences were weakening the empire's strength and threatening its stability. "The royal family has become contaminated by inferior mammalian thinking," Duke Zerion declared during a session of the Imperial Council. "This obsession with feelings and connection is making us weak. Our enemies will interpret these changes as signs of vulnerability." But Zephyra's response surprised everyone, including her critics. Instead of defending her new approach or attacking the Duke's position, she used her enhanced empathic abilities to understand the genuine fears behind his objections. "Duke Zerion, I can sense that your concerns come from a deep love for our people and our traditions," she said calmly. "You're afraid that by changing, we'll lose the strength that has protected us for millennia. That's a valid fear, and I want to address it directly." What followed was perhaps the most remarkable political discussion in draconian history. Instead of the usual formal debates and power plays, Zephyra facilitated a genuine exploration of how their society could evolve while maintaining its core strengths. She acknowledged the value of draconian discipline and power while demonstrating how emotional intelligence could enhance rather than replace these qualities. The breakthrough came when she asked Duke Zerion to share his specific concerns about threats to the Empire. As he spoke about border tensions and resource competition, Zephyra began to show how the improved communication and collaboration within their society would actually make them stronger in facing these challenges. When our people can communicate openly across all levels of society, we get better information more quickly, she explained. When our leaders understand the emotional climate of our population, we can make decisions that have broader support and are less likely to create internal conflicts. When our military leaders can have honest conversations with civilian advisors, we develop more comprehensive and effective strategies. By the end of the session, even Duke Zerion was beginning to see the practical advantages of the new approach. More importantly, he felt heard and valued rather than dismissed, which reduced his resistance to the changes. As months passed, the transformation of the Draconian Empire became one of the most studied sociological phenomena in the galaxy. Neighboring civilizations sent observers to understand how a society known for rigid hierarchy and emotional suppression had become one of the most psychologically sophisticated cultures in their sector of space. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being an honored guest who had accidentally triggered a civilization-wide revolution. The human diplomatic mission had accomplished far more than anyone had imagined possible, not through traditional negotiations but through the simple act of one person offering genuine connection to another. "You've changed everything," Zephyra said one day as they stood together on a palace balcony, looking out over a city where Draconians were learning to live with unprecedented emotional openness. "Not just for me, but for our entire civilization." Sarah smiled, though her expression was thoughtful. "I think the capacity for change was always there. Draconians are naturally empathic beings. You just needed to learn that empathy was a strength rather than a vulnerability. Sometimes all it takes is one person showing a different way of being in the world. Will you stay?" Zephyra asked. "We have so much more to learn about building genuine relationships and processing emotions in healthy ways. The humans seem to have insights that we need." Sarah looked out over the transformed city, considering the question. The human colony ship Perseverance was scheduled to continue its journey to establish settlements in the Outer Rim territories. But the relationship between humans and Draconians had evolved beyond simple diplomatic negotiations. They had become partners in exploring what it meant to live with both power and genuine connection. "I think some of us will stay," Sarah replied. "And some of your people might want to come with us, to see how these principles work in different contexts. Real relationships aren't about one group teaching another, they're about learning and growing together." Zephyra nodded, understanding that the awakening Sarah had sparked in her was just the beginning of a much larger journey. The Dragon Lady of the Vorthag dynasty had learned that true power lay not in her ability to manipulate matter and energy, but in her capacity to connect authentically with other conscious beings. As the twin suns of Vorthag Prime began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, both women knew that they had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. A single moment of genuine human touch had not only awakened one individual from centuries of isolation, but had sparked a transformation that would ripple through space and time, showing the universe that sometimes the greatest strength lies in the simple courage to be vulnerable with another living being. The Dragon Lady was no longer alone, and neither was anyone else in her empire. In a galaxy full of advanced technologies and incredible abilities, they had rediscovered the most fundamental and powerful force in the universe, the connection between one conscious being and another, freely given and openly received. And it all began with a single, compassionate touch from a human who understood that everyone, no matter how powerful or perfect, needs to know that they are not alone in the vast darkness of space.